Welcome to part 3 of the 4-part series on transforming education through concept-based learning. I'm Rachel French, the Director of Professional Learning International, a concept-based inquiry workshop leader, coach, best-selling author, and the Director of the Erickson and Lanning CBCI Trainer Certification Institute. And I'll be your host for this series. Today, we're focused on transforming curriculum, and I have 3 dedicated educators from around the globe. So, allow me to introduce them. We have Julian Liu. Welcome, Julian. Julian is the Director of Curriculum and Instruction at Ruhr International Academy in Taipei. He's also a part-time assistant professor at the National Taiwan Normal University. Julian is a certified Erickson and Lanning CBCI trainer, and he's been working through the process of translating the concept-based curriculum and instruction series books into traditional Chinese. We also have Nancy Fairburn. Nancy is from Canada, but she's currently the Director of Teaching and Learning at NIST International School in Bangkok. She is a certified Erickson and Lanning CBCI trainer, and for the past 4 years, she's served as a social studies specialist for the Trainer Certification Institute. And finally, we have Rasha Alhagan. Welcome, Rasha. Rasha is the pre-K to 12 curriculum lead at Sandy Springs Friends School, which is a Quaker school in Maryland, United States. She's a certified Erickson and Lanning CBCI trainer, and this year she'll be taking over from Nancy as a social studies specialist for the Trainer Certification Institute. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this conversation.
I wanted to start by inviting each of you to share your own concept-based curriculum journey, because it is a journey and it's something that evolves over a period of time. And I think it's important to recognize the journeys that kind of brought us all here today. So Nancy, do you want to start by sharing your journey? Because I know you talked about being at UWC for 10 years, and I know that understanding concept-based curriculum was a big part of that journey, and it continues to be a really important part of the work that you're doing at NIST.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess really my transition was when at another school being in the IB program and really fascinated by concept-based teaching and learning and conceptual learning. But I always felt I didn't quite have all the pieces together. And that's when I really dug into the work of Lynn Erickson and Lois Lanning at that time. And just learning about the two structures really started to put the pieces together for me. So transitioning into another school where we were really focused on how do we lift that thinking to the conceptual level, just really had an impact on me as an educator and many of my colleagues. And just having the opportunity to interact with Lynn had a huge impact on getting us started.
Thanks for sharing. And Rasha, tell us about your concept-based journey.
Yeah, it's actually quite similar to Nancy's. I started off in IB schools. I worked in IB schools, and I was really lucky to work for 8 years in all 3 continuums. I started in the MYP, moved to the DP, and then ended with the PYP and was there for 5 years. And when I worked with the PYP, I really saw that was where I was exposed most to conceptual teaching. But just like a lot of people who work with the PYP, I didn't think I was able to fully grasp how to teach conceptually, how to make our PYP units properly interdisciplinary, especially with special subjects, English, how to bring English and really pay attention to like the actual discipline of the English language arts when you're teaching a science or social studies based unit and frame it around a topic. When I was back in Abu Dhabi, I actually heard about Lynn Erickson because our school had invited her to come and speak and do a workshop, and everybody was so excited. And I actually ended up last minute missing that workshop. I don't think I've ever told you this, Rachel.
No.
But I actually ended up missing that workshop because my daughter got sick and I couldn't attend. And all the teachers came back and were like, "Oh my God, this was awesome. This looks the best PD ever." And of course I missed out. And lo and behold, that was the last one she ever did internationally. And then when I came back to the United States, I heard she had retired. And so I thought it was actually over. But I did look her up, and then I found you. And I attended one of your concept-based inquiry workshops in Florida. And I was like, I think I was completely blown away. I was like, wow, that was awesome, especially the power of inductive teaching. So I decided to do the trainer certificate. And if you can remember, it was supposed to be in person, bought all our tickets and everything. And then COVID hit. And I remember getting several emails from you, and I'm like, I can't do this online. Like, I want to actually do it face to face. I've never learned online. It's never been something that I can do well. And of course, I ate my words so fast when we started with that online training, because it was awesome. It was amazing. I actually spoke about it this morning to people, and I said it's one of the best trainings I've ever had. Completely changed my viewpoint about like conceptual teaching and how to approach questions in my classroom. That's also where I met Tiffany and the rest, and Nancy, and I met so many other amazing concept-based teachers. And at the same time, I was in this school, this friend school, where we're just in the very beginning steps of starting kind of our curriculum mapping journey. So it's really interesting. Other than, you know, Nancy's been doing this for a really long time, and maybe, I don't know if her school has done concept-based for a while. Ours is just starting. So I'm going to bring that kind of perspective of how to kind of start off in the very beginning, especially here where I am in Maryland, where concept-based IB is not something that is not very well known in this area. So it's an uphill, I don't want to say battle, but challenge.
Mm-hmm. That this is part of the beginning of a journey, but you were also talking about that this has connected you. And so it's connected you with Nancy. I know that you've stayed very connected with Tiffany. You've gone on to make the Pathways course with us, and you're still in regular contact with a lot of the people. Same with you, Nancy, and Julian. I know you've been connecting with Tiffany since. It's part of that connection, which I think is really special, and that I'm excited about, is bringing together people from all over the world. So thanks for sharing that journey. And Julian, tell us about your journey.
Okay. Well, I didn't really have a curriculum and instruction training in my college. I was doing the business MBA thing, and I work in the business world for like 20 years. But like more than 10 years ago, I decided I should turn myself into doing something more meaningful and interesting. So I went to the educational college, and later on, I got an opportunity to go to school, but I don't know how to teach. So really, because traditionally in Taiwan, it's like a teacher interpreting the textbook by the teacher, and the student just listen, sit there and listen, doing some note writing for preparing for the test. That is exactly happening in the classroom. So I feel that I really can't do it this way, because when I try to explain the textbook to myself, I really don't understand it myself. What's the meaning? So I didn't really, so I think I gotta do it in a different way. So I try to collect some videos. I'm teaching social studies. So I try to collect some videos and cut it in a small piece, and adding some questions. And hopefully the student can get what the book is talking about, what's the really meaning of the textbook. So start from there. Afterwards, I joined a study group in 2017. We read the book, Lynn Erickson's book, that's
Curriculum and Instruction.
Oh yes, yes, yeah, I forgot the name. Yeah, so starting from there, I think it's go one step further than what I got there at the time. It's not only talk about concepts. It's go beyond that. It's helps me and helps students to get a deeper understanding, to see the pattern there by creating the generalizations. And at the same time, my dissertation advisor started a group for helping teachers in Taiwan to transitioning to the new curriculum guideline she also used the book, Lynn Erickson and Lois Lanning and Rachel's book, for the basic guidance for curriculum design. So we worked together at the same time. I started to translate those books, because I think that's a way for more teachers can access the book without any difficulty, because language or can be a barrier and it can be a bridge. So I think I select the way to be the bridge for bring in those ideas, which I think is great. And then not only me, many other teachers, many other college professors feel that's a way to help Taiwan teacher to transitioning from the traditionally, just interpreting the textbook instead, by providing student learning experience in an inquiry way to get to the deeper understanding, to get to the concepts and to get to the generalization level.
The part of the success that you're seeing now is that you've worked with a collaborative group in Taipei. So it's not you kind of going alone. You've surrounded yourselves with a group of educators who are passionate about delivering the best possible education for students. So I really appreciate the way that you've created that professional learning community. All right, thanks everyone. So today I really wanted to talk about transforming curriculum. And I think curriculum can sometimes be a bit of a loaded word. It can mean different things to different people. So I thought a good place to start would be with a little bit of concept formation ourselves and just talk about, what does curriculum mean to you? So I think it means different things to different people. So I'd love to hear from each of you in terms of, how do you define curriculum? So maybe Rasha, you want to start this time?
Well, I'm smiling because we actually engaged, part of my job is to lead a curriculum committee at our school that's made up of teachers and an admin from preschool all the way up until 12th grade across all subjects. So it's a pretty large committee. It's like 27 people, and we meet every other week for about an hour and a half. And our goal this year has been to gather data and to see, okay, where is our curriculum right now before we want to change it? Well, where are we, right? Because we don't actually have anything written. And so it was really funny, because the first conversation we had, we have 27 people and we probably had 27 definitions of what curriculum is. And so we had to do a deep dive and do a little bit of an investigation and do a lot of reading and research. And so from a technical perspective, I was one of the only people in the room that comes from an IB background. And so I was very well steeped into kind of the definition that IB has, which I think is kind of the what I would say one of the best definitions I have seen, right? When I looked at different research, even from the 70s all the way up until now. So the reason I smile is because we just engaged in that definition and forming that definition, and finally came up with what I think a lot of people who might listen to this might agree with. So when I look at curriculum, it's not just, a lot of teachers will say, oh, I use Pearson, oh, I use McGraw-Hill, oh, I use this book or that book. Well, to me, that's not curriculum. That's just a resource. And curriculum really is anything and everything that connects to what happens between students, adults and their students, and in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So like, what do you say you're going to teach written curriculum? What are you actually teaching the pedagogy? So the taught curriculum. And of course, how do you know that that's happened? Assess curriculum and I discipline. So that's what it means to me.
All right. And how about you, Julian? What does it mean to you?
Well, to me, I think curriculum means that there is a target to achieve, and then there's a student-centered inquiry process to help students to get there, and then there's assessment to make sure that how much student get there and how much they need to make up. I think it's most important is in the process, because for most teachers, most teachers think there's this target and cognitive target objectives, but it's really important to help students to get the cognitive and non-cognitive, including interpersonal and the intrapersonal skills in the learning process. So that's why I'm fascinated with the inquiry, the concept-based inquiry, was the predetermined target set up in the curriculum design process to get to the concepts, to understand the concepts and generalizations. It's not just for the end, but also fully utilize the process. So really, it's really a brainstorming. It's a brain burning process, but it's all deserved, because when you see the students, what happened in the classroom, they are just not sitting there, but they are thinking. I think that's a lifelong assets for a young person. So it's time to make some change.
And I think that from all the conversations that I've had with you, Taiwan is really engaging in that idea of making change through curriculum at this point. So I know that you've talked about the new curriculum that you have in Taiwan, which isn't so new anymore, because it was probably, is it 3-4 years now?
Yeah, I think this is a second or third year.
The third year.
Yeah.
Thanks, Julian. And Nancy, what does curriculum mean to you?
I think it's a great question. And Rasha, what really resonated was when we started to ask this question of what is curriculum, we really need to have a working definition as a school going forward. We went back to some of the research, and for example, Wiggins and McTighe did some research around this many years ago and came up with 86 different definitions of curriculum. And then McTighe would say curriculum is not standards, or learning goals, so forth. But I think what really resonated was out of the Principals Training Center with Bambi Betts, and she talks about the what, the whether, and the how is really within curriculum. So working from that and knowing that it's it's the hidden curriculum, it's all of these components are part of the curriculum. What we said was curriculum is like, it has those learning goals, it's that planning process, but it is the what. It is the what of the curriculum that we're dealing with. So when we thought about curriculum development and thinking about the access and the equity and access for all students across our school, we just defined that our intended learning goals are nested inside that written curriculum. So the what, the whether, and the how are all part of our curriculum definition.
You said what and whether? Whether
or not students have learned. So thinking about those stages within your planning process.
I like that, the what, the whether, and the how. It's still it's kind of reflective of the written, the taught, and the assessed. But I like the questions. It's cool.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So you're using the whether as part of your assessed.
Yeah.
Whether they have learned it. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right, Julian, we've just touched on this a little bit, but can you speak to a little bit more about how CBCI has helped you to understand and implement that change or the new curriculum that you've had in Taiwan?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Taiwan new curriculum guideline has changed the previous competency-based curriculum guideline, turned to the competences oriented. So that's why we select CBCI, because we think CBCI provide a operational way which is like provide a ladder to reach there. So that's the reason that we select CBCI. CBCI provides a more structured, more defined way for teachers to have a guidance step by step can get there. Well, of course, we have to, in Taiwan, we have to also to help teachers to connect to their current practice and to face the challenge students need to face in the end of their learning. So there's a but we still keep the most important essence, like the learning goal need to get to the concepts and generalization and to influence more teachers, we also spend a lot of time to introduce the inquiry, concept-based inquiry phases. Because well, even a teacher just change a little bit in the instruction in the classroom, it helps students a lot. Not necessarily the curriculum, the learning goal is really more deeper or how good it is, but instruction influence the students' learning outcome. It's so obvious. I think we're in the process, like I said. So we'll take time.
And I think that's really important for us all to acknowledge that it does take time and that it is a process. Sometimes I've worked with schools and their goal is to kind of rewrite their entire curriculum in 1 year. But I think although we can do all of that writing, it's what happens after that in terms of moving from curriculum. So I appreciate you really talking about that journey that you're engaging in and the way that it's taking time, that some teachers are more ready to move than others, but we recognize we meet teachers where they're at and help them kind of move forward and with the changes that they're ready to make. Fantastic. And Nancy, maybe you can speak a little bit to how you've been involved in leading curriculum development at your school. You've been at NIST. Is this your second year now? This is your second year at NIST, isn't it? Yeah. And you're very much engaged in that sort of curriculum writing process. So tell us more about that and how CBCI has influenced that curriculum design.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just going back, I think international school education, if you're not part of a national system, we have this wonderful opportunity to write our curriculum through a collaborative process, but it's also a great challenge. So yeah. I really appreciate what Julian was talking about, that this takes time. But you do need that anchor. You do need those intended learning goals, what you're working from. So currently our school is in a 3-year process of looking at our intended learning goals, really looking inward and what's currently in the school and how can we be intentional in our curriculum design. So actually the first thing we did start with was creating a set of design principles for our curriculum. And we came up with our definition of, first of all, we need to, of course, know this main concept of what is curriculum. And then what we said, what is important to us? Well, obviously knowledge, skills, and understanding, or else we just keep it at a 2D level. We want to lift our student thinking, but we're also incorporating those competencies, Julian, that you've been talking about, so which we have termed as our attributes that we feel is really critical to the learning process and for life. And also, just as global citizens, we want to ensure that we're reaching for those sustainable development goals. So we're really intentionally designing a curriculum from early years leading up into the DP program that follows an intentional design within our school.
So can you, before we go on, can you speak a little bit more to that process of creating that intentional design and making sure that everyone who's involved in that curriculum writing process is on the same page around that idea of understandings, knowledge, skills, and attributes? And what professional learning did it take within your school in order to empower curriculum writers to move forward in a manner that's consistent? Because I think that is one of the big challenges with writing curriculum, is if you're doing it in silos and the science team are over here writing theirs and the maths team are meeting in a completely different part of the school and perhaps sometimes a different time, like 3 years later, how do we develop consistency within a school? And what professional learning did you lead or engage in order to create that design piece at the beginning?
Yeah, I guess it was first giving a lot of thought to wanting it to be a collaborative process, but the collaboration doesn't mean that everybody at the same time is sitting around the table for hours and hours. It's just necessarily, it might not be a productive use of time. So what we've done is we've structured our project over 3 years into 3 phases. So the first part is development, and a lot of that development is I'm facilitating and just to keep within the design, but bringing the experts to the table. So that might be a head of department, for example, in an initial conversation. And then once the initial development is completed, it's about going to teams. So what we've built in is a piloting phase, because as you've talked earlier, Rachel, it's about, we don't know until the rubber hits the road. Have we got the right intended learning? And it's our teachers that, you know, are working with it and thinking we need to tweak this, or so it's a bit of a back and forth process. And that's really where we want our teachers engaging is this working or not, and provide that feedback to eventually be coming back to what we're calling like a monitoring, or we go on to a curriculum cycle where we say, okay, this is set. And now we're going to the professional learning is really about how, because that's where we want to be. That's where we want to be spending our time. But right now we're just doing that groundwork.
Yes.
It's 3 years. But it doesn't mean in the process there's not professional learning going on with concept-based along the way. And people are at different stages, but we really need to be mindful and careful of teacher time in what we're asking with everything else that teachers dealing with in a day. Right now, we're being quite disciplined in saying we've got to get our intended learning goals and sticking to our curriculum design in place, so we can really intentionally get to the how of our curriculum, and also have a sustainable model, because we don't want to be coming back. Of course, we always want to be responsive with the written curriculum and make tweaks. And of course, new ideas are going to come in, but we don't want to be back thinking, let's start again. I don't want to be back.
No, and well, you want to have that design piece, the way that your curriculum is designed, consistent. And so once this is done, it will be tweaking and refining. But I also really appreciate the fact that you talked about a pilot phase, because I think too often what I have seen in schools is that curriculum gets written and then it's sort of like, and it's done. And now which one are we doing next? And it's done. And so really what's happening is curriculum documents are just kind of, it's like tick, check. We finished this, move on to the next one. And the thought that goes into the implementation of that curriculum, after all of the hours and hours and hours spent writing, we tend to just kind of drop it on teachers too often and move on to the next one. So I really appreciate that you're building into that cycle, the time for piloting, for tweaking and refining, for getting feedback as part of that process.
Just one example last week that happened. We were writing in our elementary school in social studies, and we were looking at the concept of communities. And we thought with communities, there's definitely something under our standard about governance and maybe roles and responsibilities. And then, so we crafted a conceptual understanding with the lead teacher at the school, so the team leader, which sounded great. But what we realized once the team started to work with it, it wasn't about roles and responsibilities. It was actually rules and laws in the conceptual. And it wasn't until the teachers actually started to work with it in relation to their entire unit of inquiry that we realized, we need to tweak that. So this pilot phase, it seems like it's a very linear, it's almost like the inquiry cycle. It's a little bit of back and forth, and we just want to make sure we've spent the time to, that we've got it. I don't think we'll ever have it perfect or right. That's not what we're striving for, but something that can start to settle, as they say, and get those anchors down, that we can get to the next phase, where I think a lot of the professional learning, coming back to your original question, that's where we want to be spending our time.
But I think at this point, you are the one who's driving a lot of that professional learning, because you're the piece that's creating that consistency in terms of the framework. Like, you've invested years in your own professional learning, you're a certified trainer, and you are able to create that consistent structure within your own school and make sure that all of the people who are engaged in that writing process are empowered to have a common understanding of what is curriculum and what is a conceptual understanding even. So sometimes when we have people working on curriculum, if we haven't built a shared understanding of what does a conceptual understanding look like, then we're going to get very different things coming back from different subject areas. So to have you in that role who's able to kind of deliver your in-house professional learning around what does a conceptual understanding look like? What is the difference between knowledge and skills? Because that's not easy. And we're not trained as teachers. When we go through teachers college, we're not trained to write curriculum. And so you're in a role there that can make sure that as a school, when you're building curriculum, you're building it with a common approach. And I think that's so important.
Yeah, and I think I like that word facilitation, because I am not the expert. That's impossible. It's about asking the questions and also staying true, because we have our design principles, staying true to our design. And I do agree. I mean, I'm learning along the way, of course, because it's professional development for all of us as we're going along in this process. So I think that, thanks, Rachel, for pointing that out, because we are learning how to draft, effective conceptual understandings. What's the role of knowledge and skills? And we have done a lot of professional learning just around the two structures. Not that it becomes more clear once we start to implement that. If you're doing, for example, social studies, that there is critical knowledge that we want students to have. Through the research process, we have critical skills that we want students to have, but we don't want to stay at that level. And that's why we're really focused on raising our curriculum to the conceptual level.
And just so I'll ask you this same question in a moment, Rasha, but how did you lead that professional development in order to did you do it with individual teams, or did you bring everyone who's writing curriculum together as one team initially to build that common understanding? What was your process there?
Yeah, so right now, what I've been doing at just Ideal Times, beginning of the year, where we have staff meetings, it's not a full-on workshop. It's more of coming back to our design, what these structures are, and then a lot of the professional learning in-house that's been going on is when we're around the table in smaller teams.
Yeah,
as opposed to, because like as you say, we don't go to Faculty of Education to learn how to write curriculum. So really, I don't want teachers spending time there. They need to be focused on their students, but we all have to have a shared understanding of what's going on. So it's really on a team-to-team basis as we're going through this writing process.
And I loved the way that you said, I don't know it all. Like, I don't know all of the curriculum areas. The teachers who are teaching these subjects are the experts in their subject area. And so you're facilitating a process, and you're facilitating what our understandings look like, but you're respecting and drawing on all of that expertise from teachers in terms of what is the content, what is it that we need our students to be engaging with, and has that changed through the pandemic, or is that likely to just so you're able to draw on their expertise? And really, it is an absolutely collaborative process to design curriculum in international schools in this way.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. So Rash, I'll ask you the same question in terms of, I know you're at a different stage and you're probably kind of going into this now, but what's that looking like at your school, and how are you building that shared understanding of developing a concept-based curriculum in your school?
Yeah, so it's actually, listening to Nancy is really interesting, because and I've done this work in different schools. I've done them internationally. I've done them in a religious school that was IB, and now I'm doing them here at Sandy Spring Friends School. And even though I'm the same person and I know all this stuff, it's different journeys, completely different journeys, and you're learning because of the context and your audience as well. So Nancy, I got some ideas from you, so thanks for that. But I came in 4 years ago in this position. I came in as a position was academic dean of the upper school, and the reason why they needed that position was because they knew they didn't have a cohesive written curriculum, and the hope was that they were going to do that on the upper school level. Now I'm doing this for the entire school from preschool to 12th grade, and I think the first step for me was to make sure I got some training, because all these schools before where I did curriculum mapping were IB schools, and this is not an IB school. So, okay, how are I going to implement best practices? And that, again, that's how I kind of found CBI, and I found you guys, and I did that training. And I think the school invested in my trainer certificate. And so as a school, they invested in my training, but as a school, we're not yet engaged in actual writing of curriculum. We actually haven't made, when I say we, I say the entire curriculum committee that I lead, we have not made the decision to go with one framework or the other. I know a lot about that stuff. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing right now, it's kind of like in the back end where I'm kind of bringing in certain things and where there's an opportunity, because we know when we work with teachers, especially, there's this bad rep. I think you were referring to it a little bit, Rachel. There's this bad rep that curriculum mapping has. It's like this one and done. It's like, it's seen sometimes as paper pushing. I work in an independent school, so a lot of teachers feel like, oh, now we're going to do curriculum mapping. That means you're going to take away my autonomy. You're going to tell me what to teach, how to teach it, and how to assess it. I'm not going to be able to be creative. And so there's a lot of anxiety around that. And so how do you bring something that they don't know? And here's this person coming in and bringing something new, and it's a shiny new toy, and it's yet another initiative that's going to come and go. So, knowing all of that context, that really, in my position, when I'm asked to do certain things, and I'll give you a couple of examples, I try to bring in concept-based in a way that doesn't seem so overwhelming. And so, for example, at the beginning of the school year, our school has just finished a 2-year whole faculty training on mind-brain science education, just kind of understanding, the human brain, and it's how does that inform the practices that we do in teaching. So we have, like a lot of schools of the pandemic, we have a lot of new faculty this year, with some old faculty that are returning, and we have not been face-to-face, and this is our first time kind of face-to-face after 18 months of virtual teaching. And so I was asked to do a refresher for mind-brain education, and I was given 30 minutes, right? And so I'm like, okay, but it actually turned out to be perfect, because you don't want to overwhelm teachers who are just coming in for the first time after 18 months. And so how am I going to engage their thinking, bring in mind-brain education, bring in that aspect, but also bring in concept-based, because I think they're very well related when you talk about cognitive load and you talk about all those things. And so, concept-based for the thinking classroom was like the title actually of the session. And I basically took something that I learned in the trainer certificate that I think you and Tiffany repeatedly said over and over again. The first place to start would be to take that objective that we always put in. Students will be able to blank and turn it into a question. And so that's what I did. I did that. I actually asked them, I put a poll out there and I said, who should be doing the most of the thinking in the classroom, students or teachers? And it was really interesting. A lot of people said teachers. And I'm like, no, really, it's supposed to be the students that should be doing most of the thinking. Well, how can you engage them in thinking by asking questions? And so I gave examples from preschool, from kindergarten, from middle school, from upper school, different disciplines of the SWABAT. Students will be able to blank, and then how you can change that into a guiding question. So it was a really simple thing that students can do right away the next day. And teachers were really actually excited. And then leading the curriculum committee, we were tasked this year to gather data. What are we teaching? And so the first thing we decided to do, in my head, I was thinking, because I read concept-based for the thinking classroom, KUD, right? Knowledge, understandings, and skills. But I didn't want to bring a term that a lot of these people didn't understand or know. And so we said, we're going to collect content and skills. What is the content and what is the skills? Lo and behold, I thought this was an easy thing. We're going to teachers are going to write content and skills. You guys, I see your heads nodding vigorously, because the next thing was, well, what do you mean by content? What is content? What is skills? Wait, math is all skill-based. There's no content. And of course, in my head, I'm like, well, it's actually a knowledge-based discipline. There's content, but I'm not going to go into that with them. And so we did an investigation on how do we define content and how do we define skills. Did a little professional development with just the group and discussions and breaking out to breakout groups and whatnot. And then we came up with the definitions. We used the definitions from Concept-Based for the Thinking Classroom on critical content and key skills, and did a training over the span of, let's say, 3 or 4 weeks with different. I had the teachers actually lead the training instead of me or an admin lead the training. I had teachers who were in the curriculum committee lead the training to show other teachers. Critical content is what do I want my students to know? Here are some examples. Skills is what do I want my students to be able to do? And having those questions and those stems made it really easy for our teachers to be able to kind of fill out the form. And we were able to gather this massive amount of data about our content and skills. Hope is that by next year we would actually engage in concept-based and then start in that pilot phase, right? It's kind of like, what are those early adopters who would be really excited about engaging in that work and using their excitement to kind of spread slowly. And my idea is actually to do it over 2 years. So one pilot group the first year, and then the second year do another pilot group, and then have those 2 groups kind of be the leading factors that would lead the rest of the school through curriculum mapping. So
I think that's really important, and that some of the schools that I've seen who've had the most success with implementation are those that use that idea of kind of transitioning with a pilot group first and then bringing on a second pilot group, rather than saying we all have to change what we're doing right now. And it depends where the school is at, because I know, Nancy, it's a little bit different for you because you're working from a school that are very much embedded in a PYP curriculum. So the shift to concept-based from the IB programs isn't the same as the shift to concept-based from schools that haven't even, used the word concepts before. And so I really appreciate what you're saying there, Rasha, in terms of it's a different journey if teachers aren't yet even talking about concepts. And so how do we bring people on that journey in a way that they are invested in and committed to that approach, rather than just saying, right, we're here, this is what we're doing? Because I appreciate that piece of that implementation overload, and this is just the next new thing and it's going to come and go. And so we have to be able to get teachers excited about it if the idea of concept-based is new.
Yeah, and I would actually even say, I know this was advice that was given to me by many of the international admin and people that I've met through the trainer certificate training, which is, you really also need to look at, do you follow any standards? And we don't, right? We don't, our middle school might follow certain, but doesn't follow standards, and maybe our upper school for one of the disciplines follows specific standards. And so we can't even agree on that alignment. How can you write a map if you don't have alignment from preschool? So we've got a lot of legwork to do first before we could actually engage in any kind of mapping.
Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate each of you kind of sharing stories in terms of where you're at and where you're hoping to be. So thinking now in terms of the shifts that you're seeing happening in classrooms, and maybe that's your own classroom, or maybe that's wider across your school. Nancy, can you speak a little bit to, this is now really, you were very invested in doing this at UWC and again at NIST. What sort of shifts have you seen in classrooms when you get the curriculum right, and when teachers then are clear? I think for me, one of the biggest things about a concept-based curriculum is it gives teachers so much clarity in terms of, this is what I want my students to understand, this is what I want them to know, and this is what I want them to be able to do. So how does that then translate into classrooms, Nancy?
Yeah, I think it really begins at the planning process and with teams. So the translation into the classroom is then taking the intended learning goals for teams to have those collaborative conversations in their planning process. And so really at our school, because we're a large school, I'm just very fortunate to be working with deputy heads, what some schools might term as a vice principal, who really lead those meetings with our teachers. So one step that we've done, again, thinking about all the things we could be doing, what's going to have the greatest impact. The deputy heads then have been leading conversations around the type of questions that we're asking. So in that planning, we're seeing that the transfer of the questions as our intended learning goals are being embedded into the classroom practice, but it's really through the questions that teachers are asking. So one shift for us, which we, Rasha, just thinking about your question is, we are already a school that believes in concept-based. We are already a school that believes in like strong questions to engage student thinking. So it's almost like we're just going to that next step of, for example, in our PYP, the PYP talks about the teacher question, but we've actually also across, because the MYP has factual, debatable, and conceptual questions that again comes out of the work of Lynn and McTighe and these different levels of questions. So really where we're seeing some of the practice shift is really thinking about what are our factual, conceptual, and debatable questions. And what's really lovely, as soon as we start thinking about the questions and refining those at the different levels, it's also giving feedback to think, if I'm asking that conceptual question, is that conceptual understanding right? Or that generalization, is it right? So that's also this back and forth process as we're getting the curriculum to settle. We have exceptional practice happening, and we have teachers on staff that have done CBCI training, and they've done other trainings, of course, outside of CBCI. So there's just phenomenal practices going on across the school, but I think that's going to lead us over time to start consolidating these practices and come together in a shared experience as a community at our school.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of that,
yeah.
I really appreciate you saying that there are wonderful practices already happening in the school, and that you have phenomenal teachers there, and you're such a well-recognized international school. And so good quality teaching is not what you're trying to do with curriculum, because it's already there. It's just creating that kind of articulated learning journey for your students to be consistent in that. And sometimes curriculum is also just about making sure that students who are coming through and moving through the same school, we know that there are students who are transitioning in and out, especially more so in an international school setting, but that we are kind of aware of what's been taught before and what's been taught after. And if units get shifted, even I was talking about this at my local school, they've had to split classes in a different way, and they've got some composite classes. So if you have a well-articulated curriculum, you can then make decisions and choices about, well, what will this mean for these students? So I really love you saying there that practice is already great, and this is what we're doing is just going to make good practice even stronger. We're
no longer spending an hour thinking about one conceptual understanding that goes across 8 weeks of learning. And again, it's in every school. Teacher time is so valuable. But because we're now, as the articulation starts to settle, and we know from year to year, certain topic areas and conceptual understandings are in particular year levels. It's also helping our support teachers. It's helping our EAL teachers. It's helping our enrichment teachers. It's helping our teacher librarian and the resourcing in our school. So all of that is going to get stronger and stronger over time. But I do want to come back to, if we do want to change something, we have a very clear process for doing that. And we need to go back up and take that balcony view and say, if we're going to change this, how is that going to have an impact on the year below, above? Does it have an impact? So we really make an informed decision on changes in the future to the curriculum.
Mm-hmm. And so important also to be doing this K-12. Because so many schools that I consult with work, K to 5 or even early years to 5, and then they work completely independently middle school and high school. And sometimes the units repeat. It's quite common to teach migration in elementary or primary and again in middle school. And when I ask the middle school teachers, what did they learn in primary? They say, oh, yeah, I think they do have a migration unit. I don't know what they cover. And so to be able to get that K to 12 curriculum articulation is so, so important, or early years to 12.
Yeah. And we're starting to have those discussions now. And by embedding it, actually, one of our science teachers who's working with the elementary staff right now is going, now that we're going to teach that here, it actually opens up something for the middle school to look at some of the areas, because there's never enough time.
Yes.
We're actually, because we're making these informed decisions about the learning through, we're starting to be able to say, do we need that, or can we add this, or take that out? So
yes, I love that. Yeah, I love that you have your middle school and high school science teachers working with your elementary teachers, because that is so transformational in schools, to be able to say, what is it? What should a 5-year-old be understanding about forces and energy or materials and matter? And quite often the middle school teachers can say, please use this concept and not this one, or please, if you introduce that too young, or you could do that. And so we don't need to start from scratch here, because we know that you've taught that. So having that collaboration happening doesn't happen enough in schools, and it is so, so important.
I just do have to add on that, so there's no misconception, because our secondary science teacher would say she is learning so much from our elementary teachers, and she goes in and she's not, I am not the expert of year X.
Yes.
She would say, absolutely, I'm learning so much from the elementary teachers. But what she can help with is, what are those overarching concepts, and discuss that with the team if that's something that should be articulated, and have we matched it with the developmental stage that students would be at that time.
Yes. You're absolutely right. Our kindergarten teachers are the experts in what kindergarten students should know. And I love that. Thank you. Wonderful. Julian, tell us about how concept-based curriculum is kind of shifting practice where you are at RUA.
It all started from my experience in the Institute, because in the past we are accepting the traditional way of teaching. So we sit there and we note taking, and we take the exam. But in the Institute, Nancy have given me so much some inspiration. In a classroom can be like this, and the learning experience can be so different. So that mapping up with my reading of the book, the CDSAT books. So that helped me to restructure my thinking, my imagination about teaching in the classroom. Started with the curriculum design, and all the other instructors like Tiffany and Ted. Math used to be a difficult part for me, but that experience gave me a totally brand new imagination of how math can be taught. So now I can speak with the math teachers. There is something that you can be doing differently. But the challenge is that in Taiwan, in the Chinese history, exam has been a way of entering the government to be a government official for thousands of years. So that mindset has been deeply built in teachers' mind. So exam is so important, not only get into the college or get to the high school. The exam is like prevailing in the culture, in the government, in the enterprise organizations. But at the same time, in addition to the cultural influence, but in the same time, China has been through a very rapid modernization process in the past 100 years. So it is like teacher is impacted by this two different challenges. traditional exam oriented and rapid modernization. So what happened in the classroom is that teacher has to cover a lot because the exam can test anything. That's one challenge. But at the same time, you have to do it efficiently because efficiency is the indicator of modernity. So that's what happened in classroom. Well, definitely the government, the ministry has meant to make some changes. So that's why the curriculum guideline turned to competency-based, and then previously the ability-based, now the competency-based. But really to change the teachers' mindset and change their practice, we're going to take time. So now we're working some on the teachers developing professional development all over the island. But talk about my experience, my school. So now the next step, even we have 7 years history, but in terms of a curriculum, we are still kind of not so organized. So we meant to last year, but we definitely were going to do this year in the summer to map up, like Nancy said, the 1 to 12. Now we are 1 to 9. The curriculum, curriculum mapping. At least we'll come up with the major units, and then the concepts and the generalizations within those units. And we're going to help teachers to apply a little bit more the strategies, those tasks in the classroom with more guiding questions and more student tasks. So that's a process we're going now.
Engaging.
Yeah,
thank you. I really appreciate you speaking to that idea of assessment, because a number of the certified trainers that we've been working with more recently are from Korea, from Taiwan, from China, and even the certified trainers that I was speaking with last week who are in the US have this pressure of national exams that students have to work towards. And so that doesn't go away. And so looking at, that's a very real pressure for teachers. So moving towards that concept-based approach can initially feel scary in terms of, if we're not just focused on the knowledge and skills and we're working towards these understandings, and it's going to take more time, how do we deal with national exams? So how do you manage that, Julian?
Yeah, when I speak to teachers in my school or outside in those professional learning activities, I give them an example. I said, if the test is one end of the continuum and understanding is the other end of the continuum, in the past, we always heard the teacher said, it's okay if you don't understand. You just make more practice and you'll get there. Make more practice, particularly math. But I ask those teachers, do you really understand? And many of them just shake their heads, because make more practice just make you get familiar with the type of the questions. It not necessarily get you understand. So what I recommend those teachers is to shift the balance of the test and the understanding, to spend more time on understanding. And if students understand, it's helped them to not only to face this exam, but it's going to help them a longer time. So that's the purpose of education. It's not a short term. It's just a shift of the balance. You shift the percentage over time spending in the instruction.
Yeah, I remember Lois saying that same thing too, that she was, when they first made a shift to a concept-based curriculum, they were talking about preparing parents for there may be this dip in exam results, but in actual fact, they never saw that dip. So when students understand, they will do well in those assessments, because it's not just that they can do it, they deeply understand. And isn't that the better outcome? I love that you talk about the just being able to do it isn't the end goal there. It's actually that deep understanding.
Actually, that kind of resonates with me too, Julian. In my school, we are both a day and a boarding program. And so in our upper school, we have about 25% of our students are international, and a large number of those students come from China. And so I teach English language and composition. It's an advanced placement course. So it's kind of like the IB, but for AP. And I have a lot of students in that class who are from China. And because we're working on assessment, we're trying to get to the assessment, but I'm also trying to bring in concept-based in the classroom and using questions and things like that. I could see their frustration with like, wait, like give me is that the answer? What is the answer? Like, give me the answer. What do you mean you want me to come up with the answer? So and I wouldn't say just the students in China, I would say others, but definitely. And I remember a couple of them coming to me and saying, this is very different than how they've learned to maybe taught to the test.
Yeah, I think that transition is important for teachers, but also for students, for sure. So to wrap up, I just wanted to ask each of you, if you could kind of summarize in a sentence or two, what advice would you give to people in schools who are involved in that curriculum writing process? Maybe they're a director of teaching and learning, or maybe they're a teacher who's involved in that curriculum development team. What advice would you give them to going forward in terms of next steps?
Yeah, I guess it comes back to it always has to come back to what are the strategic goals of the school. So for me, for example, it was clear I'm new to NIST, and the role was new, but it was clear that the school wanted an articulated curriculum. So that was a priority. So I guess the advice would be, what are the strategic goals? And then find out what the needs are. Because you need to differentiate. When you mentioned earlier, when you're meeting with a particular subject group or a particular area in the school, it's not all the same. It's not that one-off professional learning session. It's just what are the needs, and you need to do a little research around that. And that's often hard when you're brand new to a school. You need to spend a little time there finding out. So I guess my advice in a sentence, Rachel, you asked, would be find out what's needed and ensure that it's connected to the strategic direction of the school.
Julian, what's your advice?
School, I think my prime focus is still on my school to help the teachers to do the best thing for students. So from my experience, I think it's important to offer them a learning experience. So that the teachers feel it's not only talking, it's not only we're talking about CBCI is a good stuff for the teachers. It's not only that OECD recognized that concept-based is the kind of their focus of the next 10 years, but we have to get the teachers get a real experience, the CBCI experience, real experience. And the next step, I think we're going to build up, there is a core team to build up the 1 to 12 curriculum mapping, and then provide them a clear guidance of making the curriculum design.
Thank you. And Rasha, what's your piece of advice?
Embrace discomfort. Inquiry isn't just for students, it's also for teachers and admin. And when you're learning something new, there's that stage of discomfort that comes with not knowing if you're doing it right. And that's natural. And I think it's part of the creative process. Embrace it. And the more discomfort you feel, the more learning you'll do. And if it's something that's worth understanding, it needs to be investigated and discovered rather than being spoon-fed. So I think like the idea that, we say that to our students, but I have learned through the multiple times of having to write a generalization and get it wrong, and even teach an entire unit and realize I had the totally wrong understandings. I didn't need them to have those understandings. I actually experienced that this year, and the frustration that comes with that. But oh my God, the learning that also came out of that for me and for my students. So embrace it.
Thank you. And thank you all for sharing your insights, your journey, and seeing it as a journey. I think that we're all on this journey together. So I appreciate collaborating with all of you, because we've all met through the Institute, but we've stayed in touch. So thank you. I really appreciate it. And for those of you who are listening to this discussion, I invite you to share your thoughts and your journey in our Facebook group, and also to ask any questions, because we'll reconnect with these people. And so record your questions in that Facebook group so that we can get those questions to them. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you later.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.